Thanks for joining us for this afternoon's webinar. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. I know we have a few more people still waiting to join, so we'll check back in a couple minutes.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, we'll get started in just 1 minute. The chairman is running late, and we'll get started once he's able to join us.
Justin, can you hear me?
Yes, Bob, you there?
I am here.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. We're going to get started with this month's webinar, and the title for this month is A Vision for the Future. And my name is Justin Kirk, and I'm the Executive Director of Delta Upsilon Fraternity, and I'm joined by Bob Lannon, our Chairman of the Board. I've served as the Executive Director for the last 10 years. I'm entering my 11th year. Bob, do you want to introduce yourself and give a little bit about your background?
Sure. This is Bob Lannon. I'm a graduate of Nebraska in 1981.
I think we may have lost Bob, so I'll wait for him to call back in. Bob, are you back on yet? Okay, I'll go ahead and get started while Bob is calling back in. And what we're going to do today is start with a state of the fraternity. And for those of you that were at the Leadership Institute, this will be much of the same material you saw there. And then Bob and I will update you on some changes that are happening in the industry and some decisions that were made at the recent NIC annual meeting held in late August that will really impact all chapters and what we have going forward. So we'll start with the state of the fraternity with some updates from last year. And so the first part we're going to talk about is recruitment. And last year, the fraternity, we recruited 1,844 associate members, and we ended the year with 4,350 undergraduate members. And these two numbers are the highest in the history of the fraternity. So not only were the associate members up, and our undergraduate members were up as well. And if we looked at those recruitment stats, our average chapter size has grown to an average of 58, and we have a 93% growth in the last 10 years. I was recently with a number of my executive director peers, and we were talking about growth over the last 10 years, and the NIC shared some specific data about the growth in the industry. And so DU is up 93% over the last 10 years, and the industry average is 46%. So the industry is growing, fraternity membership is up, expansion has been good, but it has been especially good for Delta Upsilon over the last 10 years. And our average chapter size has grown from a number in the upper 20s to now 58 after this past year. As we move through this, you'll see that there's a question box on the right side there. So if you have questions, feel free to type those in, and I'll be able to see them and answer them as they come up. So next, we'll talk a little about expansion. And so last year, the fraternity expanded at 3 locations. The first being an expansion at the University of Texas, and this was a return for DU to an old gold. And our expansion team recruited 64 new men at Texas. Syracuse was a late fall, early spring expansion, and we recruited 83 at Syracuse. And then Florida International is a new colony for Delta Upsilon, and we recruited 31, and they're now up closer to 40 members. And so those were the 3 expansions for the fraternity last year. This fall, we're expanding at Illinois State University, and the expansion team is there on the ground and have started their efforts. And Illinois State is a campus that has an average chapter size in the upper 50s, and we have a number of good alumni in the area that have offered to serve as advisors. And in our first couple of weeks there, we have had close to 100 men reach out to us and say that they may have some interest in starting a new fraternity. So we're hopeful that that will also turn into a good expansion for us. And then next year we have expansions planned at Missouri and Bucknell, and both Missouri and Bucknell are old golds that we'll be returning to in the next year. So really our expansion strategy has been focusing on our old golds and identifying institutions that have a profile and makeup that really fits what we think is going to be successful for the fraternity. And so we're using a rubric that is scoring each institution based on what we have found to be successful for DU chapters. And there are some universities that are reaching out to DU to say we'd love to start a chapter, but they're just not fitting the profile of what we want in a chapter. And so we're really selective when it comes to expansion and just really identifying the universities where we think we have a good chance for success. Last year, the fraternity staff conducted 129 chapter visits. And so with 75 chapters, that means every chapter was visited once, as well as many chapters received multiple visits. And a lot of the strategy there was looking at our merit membership standards, identifying the chapters that we thought were either trending in a direction that was of concern, or looking at chapters that we thought had the greatest opportunity. And so there were some chapters that received 2, 3, and 4 visits last year, but we conducted 129 chapter visits last year, with every chapter being visited. One of the focuses for the fraternity over the last 6 or 7 years has been, how do we drive more men to our educational programs? And we've added a number of programs to the portfolio. So what you can see there on the screen is all the programming opportunities that the fraternity currently offers. And last year we had 3,164 participants in one of our educational programs. And it included these programs you see there, the Building Better Men weekends, as well as some of our participants in the Greek Life EDU. So that number has grown pretty significantly over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, we had 384 participants in an educational program, and now we've grown that number to more than 3,000. So ultimately, one of the goals in the last fraternity strategic plan would be that we'd have about 40% of our membership attending an educational program. And so that more than 3,000 participants includes some men who attended 2, 3, maybe even 4 programs. But really where we want to get to is that more of the average member is attending some program, not just the president, not just the officers, but we'd really like to be able to get all of our men attending some program. And so we continue to focus on and try to grow that number, and we'll continue to do so in the future. And so one of the ways that we're going to hope to grow that in the next year is by looking at some of the programs and figuring out how can we discount or make those programs more accessible. We know from our members who attend the Global Service that they have this, some would say, a life-changing or transformative experience. But yet there's a barrier on the price point for some of the men to be able to attend when they have to pay a registration fee, and then they have to purchase a flight down to Jamaica or wherever we're conducting that trip. So we announced at the Leadership Institute this year that we would reduce the price of our global service trips down to $250 for registration, and then the student just needs to find a flight to get there. And so we're hopeful that by reducing the price to $250, that it will enable more men to be able to attend and participate in the program. We're also offering scholarships to the Undergraduate Interfraternity Institute. And this is a program of the North American Interfraternity Conference, the NIC, and it's a week-long educational leadership program that's conducted over the summer. And the NIC conducts 10 of these programs throughout the summer, and those 10 programs are made up of men and women from across North America. And they spend a week talking about leadership and values and how to make change within their chapter and the community. And so what we want to do over the next year is offer every chapter one scholarship to attend UIFI. In the past, the Educational Foundation has been offering between 10 and 12 scholarships each year. And next year, we are going to open that up and be able to offer every chapter one scholarship to attend UIFI next summer. So we're hopeful that all chapters will take advantage of that and be able to participate in UIFI next year. Hopefully, each of you have gone to the new deltau.org. The website has been updated, and we launched it on August 1st of 2017, just before the Leadership Institute. And the new website is user and mobile friendly. So if you click around on some of the boxes there, it's much easier to use than the old site. And if you pull it up on your cell phone or an iPad, it's mobile friendly and easier to use mobile. Additionally, we have added more resources, and I think the resources tab is easier to navigate. The quarterly is easy to access and read, and within the next month, we're hopeful to have rosters and AM and initiate reporting will all be streamlined with our database. And so hopefully that you'll be able to update rosters, look at rosters, and be able to do it right there online in live time and not have to send things in on a semesterly basis. So some of those back-end pieces will be updated in the next couple weeks, but we're hopeful that it'll be easier to use and the resources will be more accessible for everyone. So we want to shift gears and move to talking about our membership outcomes assessment. We launched the membership outcomes assessment 2 years ago, and this is our research and assessment project where we're measuring the culture of chapters, the growth, learning, and development of our members. And if you're unfamiliar with the project, each spring, all of our members get a link to complete a 45-minute survey or assessment that then provides data to us on information about the chapter and individuals. And so over the last 2 years, we've had a 79% response rate, which, as we talk to the researchers, 79% of any population responding to a survey that somebody has to take online is really pretty unbelievable. But to have 75% of college men participate is even more unbelievable. As we've talked to those researchers, they've said, how do you get college men to participate at a level like that? Because on campus, they're having a hard time getting men to participate at that level. So that there's a lot of credit that goes out to our chapters and our undergraduates and our advisors to encourage the men to participate in the project. And so what I want to do is share some results on the project and some of the data that we've gotten back after year 2. So the membership outcomes is really driving all areas of the headquarters operation: chapter servicing, ed programming, our fundraising efforts, and each chapter will receive their strengths and then their areas for improvement on an annual basis. So as an advisor, if you haven't seen the document that says what the chapter strengths are, where there's areas for opportunity, please reach out to us here at the headquarters, because all the chapters have received it, the presidents receive it. But if you haven't seen it, please let us know, and we'll be able to get that out to you so that you're able to work with the chapter. So what we saw after year 1 is that our primary loss prevention measures, and that this would be the attitudes towards sexual assault and hazing and our alcohol use, all decreased significantly from year 1 to year 2. And so we said, okay, we're seeing a real decrease in these important loss prevention measures. What are some of the things that we did over the last year that may have made a difference in moving the numbers in a very positive direction? And so the first one on our chapter service efforts, that we spent a lot of time with interventions on chapters that had scored higher in one of these areas. So if we knew that a chapter had strong hazing attitudes or higher alcohol use or higher sexual assault attitudes, we really targeted those chapters for workshops so that we could go in and work with them specifically on improving those areas. Second, as part of our Meta Merit Standards program, instead of having Greek Life EDU be optional to chapters, we made that one of the standards and have basically taken away the fee structure where chapters have to pay for it to where it's now free for chapters to use the Greek Life EDU program, and have said as part of the Meta-Merit standards, we want all associate members to complete Greek Life EDU during their associate member program. And so our year-over-year participation rate in Greek Life EDU went from 482 members to more than 1,400 undergraduates or new members taking the program last year. And Greek Life EDU is a nationally known program that have done their own individual research, and their research is saying that they're seeing strong decreases in hazing and alcohol use for people that have taken the program. And so we believe by more men participating in Greek Life EDU has helped drive down those measures within our chapter assessment and survey. Next, last year we introduced a new associate member education program. And this went from being a pilot stage to asking all chapters to implement that in their associate member as their associate member education program. We had a very high implementation rate, and because this was a new program that we used in year 2 of the assessment, we were able to measure the freshmen in year 1 and then the freshmen in year 2. And so we were able to really specifically look at the associate member education program and say, what type of difference did that make for our freshmen? How was their, what changed in their learning? What changed in their loss prevention measures? And really what we had found was that in the AM program, in nearly every construct related to that program, we saw significant development from our associate members, significant development and improvement from the previous year. And in fact, that data has been so positive that at a couple of our industry conferences, we've been asked to come present that program and the data that we have on it on why it's making such a big difference. And the NIC has also used the data that we have around the associate member education program and that its impact on hazing when they're responding to media requests about fraternities and hazing and does education work, that this program is now being held as, well, yes, fraternities do have educational programs that are making a difference when it comes to hazing. And so we're excited to see how this program will grow over the next year and the results in year 3. Additionally, our Building Better Men retreats, and if you're unfamiliar with a Building Better Men retreat, that is a weekend retreat where one of our staff members will typically arrive on a Friday and spend the entire weekend with the chapter doing workshops. And when we build the workshops for the chapter in the BBM retreats, we're really trying to target what are the needs or weaknesses of the chapter, specifically target those with the entire chapter. Instead of just 8 men coming to RLA and going back and trying to implement change, we're trying to take a program to the entire chapter and really impact everybody there to create some culture change. And so with the chapters that had Building Better Men retreats from year 1 to year 2 is their belong, accountability, and commitment scores all improve significantly. So what it says to us is that from the chapters that didn't have it, those scores didn't move significantly as compared to the chapters that did have one. We're seeing some significant improvements. And so what we announced at LI was our goal is a Building Better Men retreat to every chapter. And if we can't do every chapter this year, how can we try to do one in a every other year basis? And so we've had a great response from our undergraduate leadership. A number of chapters have reached on ask for that this fall. And actually our fall weekends are filled up. And so now we're moving to the spring and trying to get as many chapters a Building Better Men retreat. And we're using these retreats in addition to the chapter service visits. And so we believe that the two in concert will make a big difference for a chapter. And so those were really some of the drivers that we believe drove down our loss prevention measures. And last year was a really positive year for the fraternity when it comes to incidents, and as a result, our chapters did, on average, saw a 13% decrease in their loss prevention fees. And so the great majority of chapters all some type of in the next year. And so we're encouraged by that and hopeful that that will continue. So I have a question here from Jamie Larson. I'm just going to read the question and then answer that for Jamie. And so one of his questions was that on a number of campus environments, the party atmospheres have given fraternities on a bad name on those campuses. And so what is DU doing to stay away from campuses when looking at expansion or bringing back those dormant chapters? Well, in our rubric, the risk management environment, and then any data that we can find about incidents or insurance claims on this campus is part of the rubric. And additionally, before we will attend one of those campuses, I'll reach out to my peer executive directors and ask them specifically, are you having challenges risk management wise? What are your challenges there? Just so that we can get a better idea of what that culture looks like, and figuring out, is it going to be a good fit for us, or are we just expanding to a campus that, although the expansion may go well, we're just going to have problems right after we get there. And so we are certainly evaluating the campus culture when it comes to risk management as we do our expansions. One more question here that I'm going to read first and then answer. Okay, looks like we already answered that one. So moving on, the last mention about our membership outcomes assessment was the NIC recognized the membership outcomes assessment with their Laurel Wreath Award this past year. And the Laurel Wreath Award is presented to educational programs in the industry that are innovative, educational, and making a difference. And our membership outcomes assessment was recognized with the Laurel Wreath, and we were the first organization to participate in such a wide-ranging research project like that. And it's good for us to be able to look at our data and look at the changes that happen year over year. But we've also wanted to try to work with other national organizations that we believe are good organizations offering good programs, and have tried to encourage them to participate in a similar research project. And so I think in the next year, we have 3 large national organizations that we would consider peer organizations who are all going to partner with DIAD Assessments to do a very similar research project like we are. And the value of that will be, we'll be able to meet with those organizations after they get their data back and be able to do some comparisons. That if an organization is scoring as a whole much higher in belonging or accountability, we'll be able to sit down with them and say, what is it that you're doing in your programs or in your culture that's really driving those scores higher? And so it'll be great that we'll be able to have some peer organizations that we'll be able to make some comparisons with. Okay, there's one more question about CEP and when will undergraduates be allowed to make CEP submissions. We're hopeful to have that up and running by September 15th, so in the next week or next couple of days. But if we're not able to have that up and running by this Friday, we'll have some information out next week on how chapters can submit CEP, and if they can't, what we can do as an interim measure, but we anticipate having that up and running within the next couple of days. So I'm going to move to talking a little bit more now about what's happening in the industry, what's happening across the country when it comes to fraternity, and some of the changes that we're seeing from universities, from legislators. About a year and a half ago, the NIC, our trade association, underwent a pretty dramatic change. The NIC, for the most part, was representing us as organizations, but most of us didn't feel like the NIC was representing us well. And they had a smaller staff, they were somewhat organized, and so a year and a half ago, they went through a full transformation and have reintroduced themselves as NIC 2.0. They have hired a new staff, there's a new board, and all of us organizations are paying more so that the NIC can be more robust and respond to the many challenges that we're having in the industry. And so when NIC 2.0 was launched, just as a reminder that there's 5 priorities of the new NIC. The first one being greater campus support, so that when there's an issue on a campus, for instance, if a school is thinking about moving to deferred recruitment, that's going to affect all the chapters on that campus. And if I call the university, they may listen to the call, but the strength is in the entire community responding to a campus trying to move to deferred recruitment. So the NIC is taking a more active role in responding to campus issues and trying to impact campus culture. And so to do that, they've hired 4 regional campus people, and those folks are set up within regions, and they will directly address campus issues and culture within their region. And in fact, so Dominic Green, who many of you know is a former DU staff member, longtime Greek advisor, Dominic is now working for the NIC as their Northeast representative. And so anytime there's a campus issue in the Northeast, he will be the person that will respond on behalf of the NIC and directly work with the campus. And so this is giving us a stronger effort and presence as we respond to individual issues on a given campus. The second one is education, and the NIC is taking a more proactive approach in educating IFCs and IFC officers. That typically that has been left up to the campus Greek advisor to determine what education the IFC officer receives. And so the NIC is taking a more active role in education for officers and education for organizations on issues. The third one is to have a much stronger public relations presence and effort. And so they now have a crisis communications PR team that is responding to any time there's a major issue or something that shows up regionally or nationally in the media. That response is helped being coordinated by professionals at the NIC as well as a PR firm out of Chicago. And so Edelman is the firm that the NIC has contracted with, and that organizations, anytime we have an issue and we think it may become something larger than just a local issue, Edelman is engaged, and that is now a service to our organization that we don't have to pay additional for. And so last year we had some challenges at the University of Missouri that started to pick up some regional and national news, and we were able to engage a PR firm to assist us in some messaging, contacting reporters, giving the message. And so it was extremely helpful for us to be able to have access to such a reputable firm at no additional expense. Because we know that one incident on a given campus can impact the credibility and brand of fraternities as a whole. And we're going to talk about Penn State here in just a few minutes. The fourth, that they want to become a more data-driven organization, that we should know there should be one central location that is housing all the data for fraternities. We know what the average chapter size is on all campuses, that we know what the average GPA is. Instead of our staff having to call every campus and collect that information, one central body would collect all the data for the fraternal industry, and then we would just have access to it. And so they're taking a lead role in building a data warehouse that will allow us to be able to be more data-driven in decisions. And the last one is to put together a stronger government relations team. And so we have a lobbying firm in DC that we use, but we're also starting to see more legislation affecting fraternities pop up at the state and local levels. And so we now have a full-time government relations person working at the NIC. She works with our lobbying firm just so that we're able to monitor the legislation, but yet also have somebody who's actively working to influence it. And I think working to influence is equally as important as to us just being responsive. So they will be working to help shape legislation, monitor it, and there's some legislation that we will be able to address and shape, but there's other legislation that will really just be something that we are a small part of, where some of the legislation around associate issues that are bigger than just fraternities, we'll be able to help influence it, but we won't be the drivers. But when it comes to the legislation around hazing in fraternities, we can play a lead role in that. And previously, without having a dedicated person at the NIC, that was just done by volunteers. And so we now have somebody helping manage those efforts. So in the last year, if you follow the news, there was a high-profile death at Penn State in February. And it was a member of Beta Theta Pi who died after some hazing rituals, drank too much, the members left him there, and he passed away. And ultimately, that became a major national news story, and it was a real tragedy. And in fact, 18 of those Beta Theta Pi members at Penn State are now facing criminal charges for their actions of that evening. And so you have this one incident, and in Penn State, the university responded in a way that we haven't seen from institutions before. Penn State has a fairly newly renovated chapter house at Penn State, a $10 million facility. It's a long time chapter there. It had won some awards on campus and with Beta over the last couple of years. And as a result of that death, the university, without really a due process, simply said, Beta Theta Pi is now permanently banned from our campus. And they're going to have to sell the house. We're going to go after these students. And they basically took some unilateral action as a result. And so they suspended all chapters on campus and for the rest of the semester, and have introduced some pretty strict guidelines and regulations through this early fall. And as I went through this process, this action was done without consultation of students, alumni, international headquarters. They've basically said enough is enough on our campus, and we're going to address it in the way we want to address it. Now, there's a whole host of things that are deeply concerning to us about how Penn State has handled that, and the NIC is taking a lead role in negotiating and trying to work with the university, but it has picked up such national news that our concern is that Penn State is such a major institution in the Northeast that other schools will look to what Penn State is doing and want to replicate those actions. So we know there's a meeting of the Vice President of Student Affairs in the Big Ten in the next couple months, and on their agenda, a big part of their agenda is fraternities. And so what we don't want is for what Penn State did become the regular course of action at, let's just say, Indiana or Purdue or Michigan or Minnesota. And so the pressure is on our industry to make some changes when it comes to hazing and alcohol use and sexual assault. Now, the NIC and the Governing Council have been talking about some culture change, knowing that change is needed, but really the incident at Penn State has been the impetus for some of that change to happen quicker than some had expected. Because if we're not going to make the change now, these changes are going to be made for us, and that's not a position that we want to be put in. So at the most recent NIC meeting that happened in August, there were a number of standards that were approved by every organization in attendance, 73 men's national fraternities. And I'm going to walk through some of these because they will significantly change the culture with our chapters, and especially in our chapter houses. And I will say that these standards were approved, but they're being approved on a pilot basis. And so these aren't being implemented at every DU chapter. It's not going to be done next year. They're going to be piloted and then evaluated. There's going to be assessment work done to determine, are these the right approaches to address some of these issues that we've had for a long time that we've just not been able to fix. And so I'll just quickly walk through some of them, have them on the screen. And if anybody would like copies of these, I can certainly send them to you. But really what's trying to happen here is, how do we limit the amount of hard alcohol, whether it be the volume of it or the frequency, that our undergraduates are consuming? And so the first one would be that alcohol of any kind is only permitted in private living quarters for residents above the legal age, and it must be below 15% alcohol. So that's basically saying no hard alcohol anywhere in the chapter house, and if somebody's of age, they can have beer in their room, but alcohol is not allowed in any common space within the chapter house. 2, during a registered event, all the alcohol that's possessed and distributed must be restricted to common spaces and not in individual rooms. And so what we know is that in the individual rooms, that's when the binge drinking and the shots, it's not being monitored, and it's really some of the more dangerous places in our chapter houses that if a chapter is going to have an event, any of the alcohol that's consumed will be managed and be held to the common space of the chapter facility. 3, alcohol that is above 15% may only be served by a licensed and insured third-party vendor at registered events. So this kind of goes along with number 2, that if there is going to be any hard alcohol at any time in a chapter house, it's not guys bringing handles of whatever it is they want to drink in the common space. It's a third-party vendor that is serving and providing that alcohol. And so that would be similar for alumni events, that alumni could certainly have a third-party vendor come and serve and distribute that alcohol. 4th, in partnership with each campus, that the community sets a standard that significantly reduces and caps the number of events allowed with alcohol. So something that we learned with Penn State is that the chapters there were having upwards of 45 and 50 events a semester with alcohol, which goes to this frequency of it's just too many events. And so we would work with each host institution to set a reasonable number of events that a chapter could have, social events that they could have each semester. The 5th, each fraternity will utilize a standardized event management and guest registration procedure. So the NIC would work with a third-party company that would build a process by which guest lists are managed, the events are registered, the guests who are coming have already signed off on our management loss prevention policies, and so that there would be greater management of the event on the front end. Instead of 1,000 people just showing up, we don't know who's there, that there would actually be a third-party vendor who would help us manage the guest registration procedure. The 6th one, events will be limited to basically a guest to member ratio of 3 to 1, and that no event may exceed a certain number of attendees. And the campus will be able to set that, or the fire code of the chapter house. And so what this is trying to do is just limit the, some of the SEC schools we know of 2,000 person parties, which just cannot be managed in an effective way. And so how do we start to put some caps on the number of people that are in our chapter houses with alcohol during events? The 7th and 8th ones are not pilots, and these need to be implemented by 9/1/2018. And so the first one is that each fraternity will utilize a baseline health and safety education program as an educational requirement. And so this is simply saying that every men's fraternity will have baseline education when it comes to health and safety, when it comes to hazing and sexual assault and alcohol use, that every fraternity will have some type of baseline education. Now, we're in a position that we already have the education that will likely be considered baseline, but of the 73 men's fraternities, there's a number that are just not doing much in this area. And we know that every organization has an effect on the whole brand. And so how do we start to raise the floor of what everybody's doing to a acceptable place, that all undergraduates of any fraternity are receiving some type of education when it comes to health and safety. And then on number 8, that each NIC member fraternity will have some type of medical Good Samaritan policy. So what we saw at Penn State, and we believe happens in a number of other places, is that an incident will happen, and our undergraduates are afraid to call 911 because they don't want to get in trouble, right? They don't want to either get in trouble with the university or the headquarters or even criminally. And so they look at somebody who they think, well, we think he drank too much, but we'll just let him sleep it off. We're sure he'll be fine. We'd rather them be in the mindset of, we think he's dragging too much, we need to call 911 immediately and not be worried about the repercussions on the back end. And so what has happened, what we saw at Penn State was the men kept partying around this individual who had fallen and hit his head multiple times. They continued to party, and then once they realized they had a problem, you can see the text message chain of not allowing people to call 911, an entire text message chain of how we're going to cover this up, and then that next morning, basically cleaning up, changing the individual's clothes, putting him back in bed so that they wouldn't get in trouble. And if there was a Good Samaritan policy, we don't know, but there may have been some guys in the chapter that say, we got to call 911. And so many states have these, and we will work through what that will look like. We're getting legal opinion and opinions from our insurance folks on what would compose a Good Samaritan policy for a fraternal organization. And so we're going to work through that. But these are the initial standards that have been adopted. And on those first 6, by all the fraternities approving those standards, what that means is if a campus is chosen to pilot, and so for instance, if Oregon State, because I see that Jeff Waymack is on the call, if Oregon State University and the community says, we want to pilot these NIC standards, by us voting to support them means that all of us have to enforce them on our chapters on those campuses where they're piloted. So we don't have to enact this nationally, but if one of our chapters, that campus is chosen for the pilot, we then need to enforce it. And so these will be worked on over the next couple of years, but I think it's important as advisors that you know that there is some change coming and that we start to think about and prepare for what that's going to look like down the road. And so I have a couple questions here. One is, what about co-hosted parties with other Greek houses? So because this is adopted by the NIC and all but 3 men's fraternities are part of the NIC, that a co-hosted party can still happen, but it has to follow all these guidelines and policies. We're also in discussion with the NPC on how we can get women to support and abide by these policies as well. We know that so much of the social culture within our chapter is driven by what the sorority women want or the alcohol they want, and the women aren't having parties in their house, and so they say, we're going to go party at your house, and we want the party to look like this. So for us to really be successful, we're working with the NPC that we have the support of the women as we try to enact these standards. And so I'm going to take a minute here. So if you have questions about any of those, please feel free to type them in. But I'm going to move to next, where our fraternity is when it comes to a strategic plan. DU's last strategic plan was a 2012 to 2016 strategic plan, and you can find a copy of that on the website. But a lot of the initiatives that you've seen over the last 5 years have been driven by that last strategic plan. So all of our assessments around all of our measures around assessment and research all came from that last strategic plan. The Meta Standards Program, driving the Global Service Initiative, really anything that's been done came from the last strategic plan. And so now that we have completed many of the items in that plan, the board is moving now to a long-range planning committee that at their October meeting, they'll begin to look at that last plan and say, what was successful? What do we need to still spend a little more attention on? But now that we're 5 years later, we have new programs. What are the new needs that we need to identify and focus on? So at the October board meeting, there will be some initial discussions about what should the next plan look like, and then over the next year, input will be captured from advisors and undergraduates and our campus partners on what are some of the needs and challenges, where do we need to dedicate more resources, and all of that will be directed towards the next plan. And so one of the things that I do know that will be in the next plan is how do we provide stronger support and recruitment for our chapter advisors. And so often it's a thankless job, but we really do appreciate all that you do. And so how can we as an organization be better at recruiting and training advisors, providing more resources, and ensuring that every one of our chapters has a full advisory board that is supporting them day in, day out? Because we know our strongest chapters, the chapters that win sweepstakes each year, have strong advisory boards. They don't have one person who's doing the job of many. They have a full team of people who are engaged and they're active and they're helping pave the way for the undergraduates. So that will be one of our focuses in the next plan, is how do we really support our advisors and provide more resources. And so that next strategic plan, that will be the process over the next year. And so I see a question here. I'll send out these 8 standards. We'll send this out next week. The NIC is going to provide an update of everything that happened at its last governing council meeting, which includes the adoption of these 8 pilot standards, along with some other standards and some changes to their constitution that we'll provide to all advisors and chapter presidents. And so one final thing, as I just thought about it, we sent an email yesterday to all chapter presidents, and I believe advisors received it as well, that more and more campuses are asking our chapters to sign relationship statements. And they may call them other things, but basically they're agreements that if you're going to be a recognized student organization or a recognized fraternity, you agree to X, Y, and Z. And at Penn State, as they asked the chapters to sign these relationship agreements, the NIC has taken the lead on renegotiating what's in those statements, because they were asking our individual chapters to provide insurance standards that are higher than what the fraternity provides. And so that would just be, frankly, almost impossible for the chapter to do. And there was a number of other strict guidelines within that relationship statement that we're simply not going to sign if they're requiring the chapter to do those things. So if you have any relationship statements or agreements that the university asked you to sign, or if you ever hear of the university considering deferred recruitment, or for instance, at Kansas State University, they basically got rid of the Fraternity and Sorority Life Office and just rolled those staff into the student life staff, and our chapters there will receive less support. So if you hear of any of those things, please let me know. I'll pass that on to the NIC, and we'll see what we can do as an industry to address those challenges. And so that can be local ordinances that you hear around housing. It could be something in the Greek Affairs Office. It could be something you hear at the state legislature. If you hear of anything that will impact our chapter and the way that we're currently operating, we want to know. And we will try to do whatever we possibly can to address those issues. And so that is what we have planned for today. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get Bob to connect. And what we hope to do is be able to have Bob on a future webinar later this fall, possibly after we've had some discussion around our long-range strength planning committee. But we will send some of this information back out to you. This webinar was also recorded so that you can share it with other members of your advisory board so that they can watch it. And unless there's no other questions, and it doesn't look like we have any other in the queue, again, I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for what you're doing day in and day out. Thank you for your service. And if you have any questions about this that you didn't get a chance to ask, please just give me a call, send me an email, and I'm happy to talk through what any of these, why we're doing something, why we're not doing something, what these standards mean, how it impacts DU. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. So again, thanks everybody for giving up almost an hour of your time on this Wednesday, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks again.